Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of black metal origins, checking out some black metal or proto-black metal from the early to mid 80s that kind of showcase the transition of some of the earlier ideas into what we know as black metal today. So we're going to be checking out a band called Hellhammer. The song is called Massacra? Massacra? Every time I see that word, I want to say mascara. I think it is Massacra, though. Alright, and it comes off the Apocalyptic Raids album, so yeah, I think I already know what's going to be going on here. They're kind of setting the stage already for what I'm expecting. Let's dive into this and see what's going on with Hellhammer. Yep, there we go. Production on this is interesting because it reminds me of some of the stuff we checked out this week, but it's cleaner. I think it's even cleaner than Venom. Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to keep the energy across the drum fill. Very dry tom sounds, though. Once again, this style of bass kick, though. Yeah, so has a little bit of punk ideas to it, I feel, and it's something that was pointed out to me on Tuesday, I think it was, in the comments. Yeah, I think it was on the Bathory video, was that, first of all, black metal was inspired from punk, and I think I talked about the punky drum rhythm when we looked at Venom, but I don't think I ever made that connection that this was actually sort of an evolution from punk, taking some punk ideas and merging it with metal's stylings, right? The heavy metal of the day. I think someone told me they were taking punk's speed and aggression and merging it with stuff like what Judas Priest was doing, and that's how some of this early stuff was created. And here's an interesting bit I found out this week, is that Venom was heavily influenced from Motorhead. And I didn't know who Motorhead was, so I went and looked it up. And yeah, I mean, Ace of Spades. I think everybody's heard Ace of Spades. Um, I didn't know the band who played that was called Metal or Motorhead. But yeah, 100%. I can hear so much of Motorhead. Well, I mean, I've only heard one song, so I can hear so much of Ace of Spades in this song, in Venom. I don't even remember what Venom song. Oh, Black Metal. Yeah. Not so much in Bathory. Like, you could hear the influence, but the sound had been transitioned into some of that lo-fi production, and it had begun to take on a different vibe. But yeah, this song right here, 100% I can hear Ace of Spades in it. Everything from the production to the style of music, the melodic lines, the drum rhythms, even the vocal presentation, the vocal delivery. It's all very Ace of Spades, probably very Motorhead, assuming Ace of Spades is indicative of what they do. And it was interesting because it's kind of been at the back of my mind when we checked out Venom and yesterday's, what was this band? Oh, Celtic Frost. Yeah, a little bit of Celtic Frost in there. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. And yeah, it's Motorhead. It's Ace of Spades. But we can even see, most of these songs have been on the shorter side. 3.5. This one's actually under 3 minutes. That definitely is something that was taken from punk, and some of that, to me at least, comes from the speed. When you're playing this fast and you have lyrics that are coming out this fast, your story is getting told at a ridiculous speed, it's going to be difficult to really drag that out without having to come up with a lot of stuff or dealing with a lot of repetition. And at least for my tastes, I feel like they're already bordering on being too repetitive. I think this song worked very well, being that it was under 3 minutes. They barely had any time to hit a point where I felt that they were going too far into it. But I think yesterday when we checked out Celtic Frost, I was starting to feel that the repetition was getting a bit much as we got closer to the end. Because like I mentioned yesterday, there aren't too many riffs in this style of music yet. And it's all sort of the same thing. It's all this super fast tremolo picking. Actually, no, it might not have been Celtic Frost, because Celtic Frost was the one that changed things up with the groove, right? I think that's accurate. Yep, Celtic Frost had a bit of groove in it. So yeah, they maybe it wasn't Celtic, maybe it was Bathory that was starting to wear on me a bit. But they all do pretty much the same thing, which is just this really fast tremolo picking, constantly playing this pedal tone, this root note before playing a little lick at the end of a bar or a 4-bar phrase, or however long the phrasing is. It is just this constant onslaught of monotony with pockets of contrast. And the contrast isn't super stark either. It's still fast. It's short. And when you look at it on a larger level, there's not a lot of contrast on the big picture. You still have these long pockets of the same idea going over and over. So it's definitely a vibe that I think you have to be in the mood for, you have to be in the mindset for. There's definitely going to be people who are drawn to the speed and the aggression, and that is enough to fuel them. Maybe they even think the songs are a bit short. But yeah, for me, these songs are really pushing my limits for repetition. So yeah, let's get into the production, because I think the production is an interesting thing going on here, in that it's closer to Venom than Bathory, definitely, but I also think it's even cleaner than Venom, and it's actually closer to what Motorhead was doing. The guitars have some crunch, they have some distortion on them, but it's more of that heavy metal distortion rather than the black metal distortion. A lot of the timbre of the note of the guitar string is still quite present, and it doesn't have that heavy layer of fuzz that's trying to obfuscate everything else below it that we saw with Bathory. It's really interesting because this came out in '84, which I think was a couple of years after Venom. Yeah, Venom was '82. So where's Bathory in this? Not that oh, I don't have a date for Bathory. Not that it's indicative that Hellhammer was listening to everything that came before them and was making decisions based off of that. But, it's interesting that even a couple years after we started to see some of this production that gets more grittier, more lo-fi, that we still have some bands doing what Motorhead was doing and kind of having that brighter sound to it. And I think that's something that's always just going to astound me is that music isn't linear. Like with a lot of history, we like to view things retrospectively and tie events together that might not have had any ties. We look at history and say, oh, this, influenced this, and that's why we're here. And that's not usually how history works, but it certainly is not how history works with music, because that would require the knowledge of what these people were listening to. And unless they've explicitly stated it in interviews, we don't know what influenced them. Being that this came out after Venom, I'm sort of inclined to say, oh, they were inspired by Venom and tweaked the sound a little bit to be more their own. But it's honestly possible that they didn't listen to any Venom or Bathory or Celtic Frost, and they were heavily influenced by Motorhead themselves, much like Venom was. And it was sort of two starting points that were going in the same direction. So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's just really interesting that even after the black metal sound has begun to form, right, and begun to have some experimentation into what would eventually become what we know as black metal, there were still some people who were starting back at the beginning or thinking possibly that the original way was better. The lo-fi stuff, maybe it wasn't for them, but they liked the sound of Venom or Motorhead, and they were sticking with that. So, yeah, like I said, history is interesting. And I kind of wish I could talk with most of these guys and kind of see the bigger picture. Actually be able to point out some like through lines of how things were influenced rather than just kind of guessing or saying because it's chronological it must have happened this way. But yeah, so going back to the production, it's cleaner, but the interesting thing is that it has Celtic Frost's bass kick and the super dry toms. Like it's a weird mix because the guitars are clean. They remind me of Venom, they remind me of Motorhead. The vocals are a bit cleaner. They have some grit to them. But again, we're kind of giving me a Venom or Motorhead kind of vibe. It's the drums that I think are the ones that are throwing me off because they are heavily muted. They're missing all the reverb. They're very dry. And that bass kick, much like Celtic Frost, just punches through everything with this thud. It's not even a nice chunky sound. It's just this thud that can be heard above everything else. And once again, it sounds like a heartbeat. And I'm really not a fan of it. I was kind of hoping after we got done with Celtic Frost doing it that we could be done with it. I said it was starting to get a little annoying yesterday, but it's back. And I'm curious where that came from. And were they influenced by Celtic Frost in that regard? Did they love the drums but thought the guitars weren't great? Did they not hear them? And once again, started in the same spot, arrived at the same position, just not being influenced by each other. I don't know, but it is an interesting coincidence. And I think it's also very cool how all these sounds are created because, again, we tend to think of music to be linear. One thing influences another. Everybody's wearing their inspirations on their sleeves, but we see, production ideas for one instrument from one band and another instrument from another band, another instrument from another band. And what to me sounded like the Celtic Frost sound might actually just be a bunch of different sounds from a bunch of different influences. Maybe the drummer liked this a specific thing and he wanted his drums to sound that way, and the guitarist had a different thing in mind. Um, and it's kind of wild how we have this explosion of similar ideas in this pocket of space where they're all sort of experimenting with the same types of concepts as far as music and sound go, but they're all getting different combinations. And that's just really fascinating to me. Um, and the other thing I want to touch on before we get into the lyrics is the sloppiness of it. That's just, it is such an aspect of black metal that I have to sort of just see it as indicative, or not indicative, qualitative of the genre, of this early day of the genre, is sloppiness, making mistakes and leaving them in. And here, it's not so prominent. I don't think there aren't there aren't notes that I'm like, ugh, they don't work together. But it's more of a looseness with the time. It's mostly in the drums on this track. Although there are some inconsistencies with the vocal production, they're not as prominent as when we checked out Celtic Frost yesterday. Yeah, everything's a bit more muted, a bit tighter, but the drums have a looseness to the meter, especially when you listen to the bass kick and the snare, and they're, if we look at a technical band, like a Meshuggah or something, the dude is a human metronome and everything is perfectly in time. This is sort of the opposite of that. The entire thing is snare on the downbeat, bass kick on the offbeat, and it's just alternating those quite quickly. But it's not super rigid where it sounds like a drum machine could cover it. There's human error to account for. Sometimes the bass kick is just a hair early, sometimes it's a hair late. And it creates this, it's not a free-flowing time feel, but it definitely has elements of dragging and rushing throughout that, again, just feel very human to me. And I'm quickly associating this with early black metal is, again, I want to use the word sloppiness because I think that's the best word to embody what's going on. It's playing that's not perfect, and from my musical education, we tend to call that sloppy playing. But that's because we were usually aiming to be as perfect as possible, whereas I don't think these guys were aiming for that. It might have been nice to do, but they understood the limitations of the human body and said, if we don't make it perfect, well, that's fine. Honestly, we don't care. And that's very different from playing classical music, which has a strong rigidity to it. So yeah, again, I think this is the fourth band out of 4. We're at 100% for mistakes in the music. And, some people have told me also that they didn't have the capability in the production to necessarily go back and fix these easily. So that might be playing somewhat into it. It's possible that if I continue to explore some late 70s, early 80s music, that it's going to show up in a lot of it. Especially, I mean, even in the past I've talked about it when we've checked out early prog music. It showed up frequently, especially in jam bands. Man, there's one band in particular, I can't remember what they're called, but I think that was one of the big things to me, is that it felt like the song was just jamming along, no real direction, but lots of flubs everywhere, like it was done in a single take. So let's dive into some lyrics, which I think is the final thing I really want to talk about here. I wish I could talk more about the music. I feel like I've skipped over that entirely this week, but The music, there's not really much to go on there. Like I said, it's a lot of tremolo picking on root notes and then little lines here and there. There aren't even melody lines in a lot of the vocals, and there's no guitar solos. It's just a lot of speed and aggression. That's what the music is there for. It's not really going for anything theoretical or technical. It's going for a vibe. It's going for a feeling. It's very sonoristic. So it does its job very well. It just leaves me with very little to talk about as far as the musicality of what's going on. So yeah, let's dive into the lyrics. I've had a theory from the start that this was going to be sort of thrashy music, or now what I could probably say punky music, with some metal vibes plus satanic imagery. And yesterday, Celtic Frost kind of destroyed that a little bit with not really being satanic. It was dark, it was morbid, but not very satanic. And today's also kind of pushes against that. The song seems to be in reflection of all religion and views it all as bad. Talks about the destruction and hate and the sewage of faith. It doesn't outright name, well, it kind of alludes to what I would assume is Christianity and many of its offshoots, but it doesn't outright name any one religion. In fact, it compares satanic rites and the use of blood and all of that, and says, well, the other side isn't any better. So that's pretty much it there. It doesn't seem like there's anything metaphorical here. It is very surface read. So again, we don't really have anything that talks about Satanism or satanic elements in the lyrics, but it is about religion, and Satanism does pop up in it. It's sort of alluded to, talked about, but again, it's a song that doesn't have satanic vibes. And I'm wondering if it's possible that Venom sort of created this sound, right? They're the origin point. Even if not everybody was influenced by Venom, I think it's highly probable, based on my limited experience with this topic, that most bands have a connection, if not through one or two bands, that tie back to Venom in some way or another. There's a reason the genre is called black metal, and it's named after their album and song Black Metal. And I think that satanic imagery might have been the origin point. Other bands heard it and said, hey, we want to talk about this too. And they've stuck with the sound and lyrical context. But as the genre grew, as it began to influence more and more bands, I would say that it's possible that some bands found the sound enjoyable. They wanted to replicate it, possibly put their own spin on it, but get away from the satanic imagery. And of course, as far as I know, most of the modern black metal that we've checked out on the channel hasn't had satanic lyricism in it. So, I do think it's indicative of this origin point, but that bands were quick to get away from it, possibly. I mean, this is only 2 years after Venom's black metal, and while it still is sort of talking about it, I'm curious what the rest of the songs on this album were referencing and what they were speaking about. The same goes for Celtic Frost too. We checked out one song that happened to be a bit morbid, but wasn't satanic. What about the rest of that album? And it's, it kind of has me wondering, is Satanism really a strong part of black metal? Or was it really sort of just what Venom wanted to do, and a couple of bands copied it, but it didn't take very long for bands to distance themselves from the imagery and stick with simply the sound. So, as usual, this is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this one. If you have any answers to my questions, I'm starting to see a musical through line between all of this, and starting to piece together what I could say is, an overview of what this early black metal kind of thing is. but I'm still missing a lot of context for its evolution. Specifically, like I said, the production. It's interesting how the production is jumping around through time, probably based on different inspirations for the bands, but also the lyrics. I thought I kind of had this nailed down on Tuesday, and we're only 50% on black metal tracks with satanic elements in the lyrics. So I think I'm getting away from that. So yeah, let me know if the Satanism is actually a strong part of this early black metal, and maybe I have a nice selection of songs this week, or if it really was more kind of isolated at the origin point and it didn't stick for long as other bands took the sound up. Let me know if you have any information on that. Above the comment section is a description box, and in there is a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here, which has links for everything related to the channel. You can pick up some merch. You can join me in the Discord channel. You can support me through Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter. You can check out the music I've made. You can look at, I don't know, there's all sorts of stuff in there, man. Go check it out. Also, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That's it for this one. In 4 minutes, we'll be looking at the special selection for today, which is a Swans track. I know they're a fairly large band, and I've had a lot of requests to return to them after we checked out more of a softer side of them in their later years, I believe. And I'm curious if we're going to get into something that's more typical of their earlier years today. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.